Hey groupers, Pastor Marshall here. Time for us to talk about baptism. Before we talk about that, just to get everyone talking, on Sunday I talked about what I do in premarital counseling. If you were counseling or giving advice to a couple that was getting married, what topics would you think are essential to cover? What topics are the most important to cover? Would the topics be any different if you were marrying 20-year-olds versus marrying 40-year-olds? Well, that should generate some fun discussion. Maybe you'll even want to text me what your ideas are so that I can add to my repertoire. Well, how have your views of baptism changed throughout your lifetime? If they haven't changed at all, share that as well. What do you think are people's greatest objections to baptism? Why do people not get baptized? I want you to turn to the book of Acts. Read Acts chapter 2, verse 41. Then read Acts chapter 8, verse 12. Then read Acts chapter 10, verse 48. Then Acts chapter 16, verse 33. Then Acts chapter 22, verse 16. What led up to each person in these 5 stories being baptized? Now, I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and read verses 1 through 4. And then turn back to the book of Exodus and turn to Exodus chapter 14 and read verses 13 and 14. Why do you think that some people are afraid to be baptized? What do you think of the idea that baptism is something that we are still, S-T-I-L-L, that we are still doing during? That is, that it's a passive activity. It's something that's done to us. How is baptism a deliverance? Remember, this word deliverance is the word Yeshua. It's the name of Jesus in the Old Testament. How is baptism connected to Jesus? How does baptism reflect the life of Jesus? Or how does it, quote unquote, preach to others without actually using words? And then last, how does God fight for us in baptism? Well, why do you think God had the Israelites cross the Red Sea? They'd been out wandering for at least a couple of weeks, maybe more. He could have led them out around the Red Sea and way away from Egypt. They would have had weeks head start on Pharaoh, but he didn't. He had them walk around in circles until he led them to this cul-de-sac. Why do you think that God had the Israelites cross the Red Sea? Why do you think that God asked us to be baptized? How does God leading the Israelites across the Red Sea and us being baptized, how are they similar? How are they parallel? If someone asked you, why should I be baptized? In your own words, what would you say to them? And then finally, some transparency. If you're not an immersed believer, would you share with your group why? Well, every week we just spend the last moment thinking about our application. And our application is, if you're not an immersed believer, let's make a plan to do so. Text me, email me, call me, ask your small group leader. Let's get this a done thing. Well, I hope that you have a great group. I look forward to seeing you next Sunday as we talk about racial reconciliation. God bless.